Hi, I'm Stewart, and welcome to our podcast, The More You Know. Our podcast will be looking into how the manufacture of semiconductors interacts with our everyday life. So welcome back to our podcast, The More You Know. And normally we have very special guests, but today I'd like to say we've got an extraordinarily special guest, Pam Barbato from Action Net Zero. Pam, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very glowing introduction. Yes, I'm Pam Barbato, founder of Action Net Zero. But previously, my background has been 25 years in brand engagement and sustainability communication. So yes, Action Net Zero, our whole purpose is around accelerating sustainable switches on a community level. So we're focused on individuals, businesses, and also supporting community groups too.
That's good. So, and I think I have to confess now, Pam and I have known each other for a little bit longer than our time with Action Net Zero. But so, what is Action Net Zero?
Yeah, Action Net Zero, our purpose is to help support the acceleration of sustainable change. And we do that on a community level. So for us, it's all about actually what people can do today, tomorrow. So it's using proven technologies to be able to reduce consumption, obviously carbon emissions and consumption. And the reason for that ultimately is for us, we know that 60% of carbon emissions need to happen from SMEs, so small to medium size organizations, and from individuals in the next 15 years. But we know, speaking to people out in our communities, whether that's businesses or individuals or indeed community groups, that actually there's a lot of people who think that the change is going to be driven predominantly by corporates and also by the government. So really for us, the whole purpose is to say, we all have to play our part. So we're here to support that as much as we can.
Big world out there. How could an individual like me or you or someone walking down the street at the moment, it's quite intimidating. So what kind of tools does Action Net Zero look to give to the individual? Absolutely.
So it says it in the name, we're all about what can we do today. So if we tend to start with the engagement piece, which is actually communicating with people to give context. And I think that's about a lot of people fear sustainable change for all the reasons that we know. If we're being told that we can't do this and we can't do that, it doesn't necessarily engage people. So the core focus for us is to have that conversation, which is the reality is we need to reduce carbon emissions globally by 50%. Actually, if you take that on a personal basis, and you then understand that transport alone in the UK is roughly 24% of carbon emissions, and then energy is another 20%. If we all focused on reducing our own emissions by 50%, we'd be pretty much there.
Yeah.
So if we can break that down on an individual basis and just say, okay, so how might you be able to do that at home? Do you have 2 cars? Are they petrol or diesel cars? Could you
I've got a diesel car. I'm feeling guilty now, Pam. I'm feeling guilty.
No, and again, ours isn't about judgment. And I think this is sustainability is a journey, and it's a really complex one. So we do a lot of quizzes in some of our engagement workshops, and those are, what's more sustainable, cycling on an electric bike or cycling on a pedal bike? And a lot of people will say, well, a pedal bike, of course, but actually then we contextualize it and say it's not, because quite often the food that you are consuming to be able to generate the energy to pedal that bike is less sustainable, unless you're a vegan and you buy only local produce and do all of those great things, than using renewable electric to charge a bike.
The bicycle thing, now I am feeling guilty because I am a cyclist, and I never really thought we're not saying cyclists are unsustainable. We're just saying the EV part of it is actually even more sustainable. So both are good.
I think all we're saying is it's really complicated. So what we need to do is what we're advocating is that whether you're an individual, you're a community group, you're an organisation, if we start to think about how we behave through a sustainability lens, that actually changes the decisions that we make. Yeah. And because it is really complex, we're all about saying, what could you do today and tomorrow that's based on tech that's proven or proven processes that enable you to reduce those carbon emissions. Also, we're very much focused on triple bottom line principles. So that's both people, planet and profit. So although our name is Action Net Zero, and that's just because we feel that focusing on that target actually is quite a big imperative for a lot of organisations and individuals, but actually the biodiversity piece, the ecological climate agenda, the crisis is as much an issue as well. So us is just about those nudges. What could we all do today, tomorrow, next month, next year that will enable us to reduce our emissions, with the objective being, let's try and get to that 50% mark, reduce it by 50%.
Would you say that's your vision then for Action Net Zero, or is there?
Our vision's a bit more lofty than that. Our vision ultimately is people, communities in particular. As I mentioned, we are very much focused on regional community action, and I think that's born out of a lot of behavioural science, which is if you know that your friends and your neighbours are doing something, you're more likely to do it. So if you can really focus on local community action, that can be quite a powerful inspiration for others. The vision ultimately is where we're in balance with the world, the natural world. So that's about taking responsibility for the negative things that we do and making sure that we're really focused on balancing those out, and not necessarily through offsetting.
Have you got a good example where Action Net Zero has helped enable that community activities?
Yeah, so last year we focused on a transport campaign initiative, which was focused in Bristol, and that was ahead of the Clean Air Zone. And our focus there was to say, how can we decarbonise transport, and how can we support people to make greener, cleaner switches. So we always think about the backdrop of air pollution as well. So one of the emerging areas that came out of that campaign, which I think we were really excited about, Action Net Zero is all about how can we address where the issues are and then collaboratively come up with solutions, and then come up with solutions that can be scaled so that we can then take those to other regions.
Oh, right, okay. I was just wondering what you meant by scaled.
Yeah, duplicated. So as an example of that, we identified one of the biggest barriers for transitioning to electric vehicles from a community perspective is lack of charging infrastructure. And we know that's being addressed from clearly a government perspective and a local authority perspective, rapid charging networks. We've got GridServe, who are superhighway networks. But
what's a superhighway network?
So it's brilliant. They've just started doing it. So if you imagine at the moment we go to motorway services and they, of course, have shops. And
they're in the news a lot at the moment, aren't they?
They are. And they have got obviously petrol stations. Well, imagine, and there's one over in Braintree in Essex, which is amazing. You arrive and it's all EV charging. So you'd come into a forecourt and all it is EV charging. But then like the motorway services, you get out of your car, you charge your car, and then you walk into a separate area, and that's got your W.H. Smiths and your other concession
There is
shops.
Other shops available.
And little working hubs and I won't reel off
feel like the BBC now, don't I?
Please don't promote any one organisation. But they're amazing. But they serve a purpose. That's en route charging.
Yeah.
There's also the concept of what's called base charging. Base charging is having the ability to charge your car at home or at work. So like Edwards, you are being a progressive employer. You are putting a lot of electric vehicle charging at work, which is fantastic because that will encourage people to transition. And then, of course, at home is another key area. So what we identified is at home, there are over 50% of the population who don't have driveways.
Yeah.
And that's a real blocker for people to transition. So collaboratively, coming out of our campaign, we looked at how you could put EV charging into community venues. Yeah. So whether that's sports grounds or community halls, and that would just be one or two chargers that could be used by local residents overnight, and that they would be charged an equitable amount. As again, one of the bugbears for lots of people who don't have driveways and therefore can't charge their electric car at night is the fact that they're paying a premium because they have to use public electric chargers, and that costs more. So they're almost getting hit twice. They don't have the facility to have convenient charging at home, and then they have to pay extra. So our solution actually is about saying, okay, they have to maybe pop round the corner and go to that local community centre, but at least the cost of that charging is not going to be the equivalent of a rapid charger that's in town, which has a great purpose, but not for people who want to be able to transition soon.
You've just went into discussion about the vision of Action Net Zero. How do you do that? What's the main activities you've got to do?
So it's taken us a while to work that out. Where the two core opportunities for working with Action Net Zero are, one is around the communications piece. So authentic communication and being able to engage and then connect with delivery partners. So when we talk about delivery partners, we mean solution providers. So whether that's salary sacrifice partners, whether that's EV charging infrastructure partners, renewable energy, that there is a trusted partnership network that's available. Because as we know, one of the critical issues is greenwash. And there's some great research out there that shows that what's happening at the moment is people don't know what actions to take and they're actually nervous, and especially as a small organisation as well. What happens if I go with that company and they're not as green as they should be?
Yeah,
and actually
that's
happening is making people not do anything.
In fact, at Edwards, we've had for a long time the salary sacrifice with our bicycles, and we've just introduced with the EV cars for that salary sacrifice on the EV cars. Could you explain what the salary sacrifice is? Even although I'm in it, I'm not always 100% sure I understand how it all works.
So it's a great initiative, and it's born from the government, which is how can we incentivise people to transition to electric vehicles? So the incentive from the government is to have a cost-effective way for employers to provide a leased car to employees and provide those employees with tax incentives to do so. So simply speaking, you can lease a car and you can lease it based on your gross salary rather than on your net salary. Right. So there's cost effective. And so whether you're on a 20% tax band or a 40% tax band, you will get a favourable tax incentive to be able to lease the car before you pay any tax.
Do you know, every podcast we do, the accountants always get back into our podcast, like one way or another. The barriers, are the big barriers, do you feel like, is when Action Net Zero are trying to break down these barriers we were talking about earlier?
Yeah. So one for us is a just transition. So I mentioned before, although we're Action Net Zero and that kind of implies carbon only, but it's not. We are focused on both financial sustainability, but also social sustainability.
What does social sustainability mean?
Ensuring that when we are transitioning and reducing our carbon emissions, that we are very cognizant, aware of the impacts from a social perspective. So is it fair? Is it just? We think about the turbulence in the energy market and obviously the energy crisis and the impact that is having on those that are on lower incomes. I mean, it is a really, really hard situation for many at the moment. So for us, it's saying those individuals, clearly from an Action Net Zero perspective, we need to support wherever possible. As an example, we're working with charities at the moment. Charities provide to the NHS. The NHS requires sustainability metrics. So those charities need to be able to tick those metrics effectively, i.e. show that they're decarbonising. Yeah. They need support to do that. And because they don't necessarily have the time or the budgets that bigger organisations might do, they're third sector clearly. So we are focused on, as an example, saying, right, if you were going to implement a salary sacrifice scheme, EV scheme, into a charity, there are a lot of members of that charity that might not be on a high enough income. That means that they can transition effectively. So we're actually working at board level with some of those charities to say, how can we start to look at the rewards and the incentives that you as an organisation provide, say, nurse specialists in a hospice, so that you can look at an electric vehicle as being part of a package for a particular employee, a cohort of employees, that not only reduces your carbon emissions, it also clearly improves the air quality of the communities that you serve, and also is just and equitable, so that they feel that they are able to transition to an electric vehicle and not be penalised because they're on a lower salary, and so therefore it's more affordable. So that's about that organisation looking at forward planning and saying that will also help us because it might enable us to attract more staff. And we know that the staff recruitment piece at the moment is hugely challenging for every organisation. How can we attract talent and staff into our organisation? And actually being progressive in sustainability might well be a way.
Yeah.
So that's what we mean by the just transition. And we obviously at Action Net Zero are only doing things on quite a micro level, but we support one charity. We're then able to amplify that and to mobilize that across the other charities within that region to say, we know what's worked, we know what hasn't worked, we know where the sticking points are. So it's a slowish process, but what we're able to do is work in a consultative way with those industries and those sectors to really understand where their sticking points are, help and support them. And then, as I said, to create that model that enables others just to say, great, okay, well, we want to follow that and do the same.
That's really good. So have you got any other examples of the activities that, I suppose it's still about breaking down barriers?
So, there's a number. So I mentioned the charity model and the community EV charging model, and we're now working on some built environment models, which is where we're saying, how might we be able to support businesses in particular, accelerate their transition to producing their own renewable energy, which is quite exciting because that's looking at tech. That's looking at, how do we have EV cars as batteries, working with storage units, working with wind power or solar panels, and then how that might be shared so that there is a really strong commercial model as well. So that's where those models are really about trying to save time and money so that we're able to then scale that particular model to those organisations that are relevant across the regions that we're talking to.
How do you see organisations such as Edwards, who work closely with you, Action Net Zero, how do you see organisations playing a part in that aspect of the examples, but on the bigger role as well?
So our ask of our corporate partners like yourselves and the TLTs and a number of our other partners, the core pieces, of course, is around funding. We're a community interest company, which means that we need to generate our own income. And so the model that we have is corporate partnership revenue, but also affiliate revenue. So we generate revenue through our affiliate partners. So obviously those charging infrastructure organisations. One of the key aspects, though, is around the subject matter expertise that you as an organisation bring to the table. So in your instance, clearly thinking about abatement and toxic pollutants and the impact that has on the atmosphere and how it's incredibly important that every manufacturing company is really thinking about those pollutants. This is your area of expertise, not mine. Totally. But being able to bring that expertise into those conversations because, as we know, TLT, another example, how can a law firm actually support the changes that are going to have to be made to be able to meet the sustainability challenges that we know are faced. As an example, TLT have set up an Action Net Zero helpline for those community halls or for landlords who have concerns over perhaps putting a charger that might be shared into their actual residence or having conversations with their landlord. So there's complexity in change. And so I think part of our request for corporates is to come to us not only from a supportive and wanting to be part of the solution, but is also that they are able to share their expertise and clearly that can be brought into the mix too.
So I'm seeing a picture painted now of supporting the individual and supporting and organisations coming in. How does local government and then therefore national government, what's their role to play in all of this?
So for me, it's a fascinating piece of the jigsaw because it's such a critical piece, of course, as we know. So if we go back, we as the UK have committed to net zero by 2050. The government is supporting cities by providing funding. So that's funding that is being supporting down to unitary, so local authorities. And then, of course, we have the great opportunity around combined authorities as well. So where you have those metro mayors that are in place, that provides an opportunity for those particular cities, and most of them have declared a net zero by 2030. So what they're saying is, as a city, and that's taking into context all of the built environment, the infrastructure of that city. So therefore their target is 2030. So of course they have their own strategies, they have their own plans, and that's everything from mass transit systems to district heat network systems, which are fantastic, and they will clearly deliver big cuts. But as we identified, everyone's got to play their part. So the relationship with those local authorities from an Action Net Zero perspective, I think is exactly that. It's a partnership and a collaborative, because to deliver on those targets, we have to be aligned, and there has to be that partnership piece. So for me, it's a really exciting part of the jigsaw, because it enables almost systems change, really. It's, politically, climate change needs to work with those corporates and those NGOs and all of the great organisations to deliver that change. So it's a meeting around a central challenge, which I think provides a lot of opportunities, not least in terms of green economy.
Yeah, it does seem to be a thing at the moment. There does seem to be a will coming from organisations, from the consumer, us, and from the political side. It's almost like bipartisan. Everyone realises they're going to have to work together. Is that what you found with Action Net Zero as you've gone through?
We have a very strong principle, which is that climate crisis should be politically agnostic. It's way beyond a political system, but there are political systems at play, as we well know. So that, I think, is always going to be the backdrop. Where we would love to be able to be is exactly that, is to drive change with the support of the political system, knowing that actually the climate crisis requires, as I said, everyone to work together. But that's about also creating blueprints for success. So again, our one of our core principles is do it and share it. So see where those barriers exist, collaboratively break down the barriers, and then wherever possible, then enable those new models to be shared. So that's
an interesting point, because obviously Edwards itself is a global company, and we have nearly every region where we make semiconductors, which goes into all the products that we all use as consumers. So are you saying this template, we could potentially be successful not just here in the southwest of England, but that template could be transferred nationally and internationally?
So I think if it was adopted by that collaborative partnership, as we mentioned, so corporates, the Edwards of the world, the local and combined authorities, and then there was impact metrics, and that clearly was a success, then absolutely. Because whilst the political framework might be very different in America, some of the drivers might be different, the fundamental barriers to being able to transition or to decarbonise are going to be pretty much the same. And I think, as you identified, being able to break down some of those political barriers, perhaps, and show that the climate crisis needs to have that collaborative approach, because that's the way change will happen. That's the opportunity.
Interestingly, in this podcast, I think, Pam, you had a question of maybe where Edwards fits in with Action Net Zero. And I think you've reversed this podcast round where I'm now being interviewed. And I think it's a simple aspect of Edwards as part of the supply chain, whether we're talking about our environmental sustainability at the consumer end, and breaking down these barriers. We're part of that supply chain, the manufacturer of the microchip semiconductor, which is in everything. So it's important as part of for the fear of going back to our scope 1, 2 and 3 of our science-based target initiatives, and our measurement is that part of that supply chain has to play its part. So Edwards is further upstream of that supply chain, but I think it's really important, and that's why the aspects of Action Net Zero helps us meet our environmental sustainability targets and our customers.
And it's fascinating because, of course, we know there is a chip shortage at the moment.
Oh, I knew you would bring in the chip shortage part of that point, but yeah.
I think the reason is, for me, one of the really important pieces of sustainability is to ensure that the amount that we are encouraging people to switch, so that's what we do, can be matched to people being able to actually have those switches delivered. Let's use electric cars as an example. And we know that there's a real shortage at the moment. So thinking about the role of chip manufacturing within that supply chain piece, what do you think are the biggest challenges for you moving forward to be able to support
I don't think it's going to be... I think, we've just came out of a pandemic, so there's always been a challenge about supply chains and things like that. But I think ultimately the semiconductor industry will adjust, and it'll meet these demands, and it'll do it quite quickly, probably uniquely to other industries. But I think what's really important as we invest more is part of that supply chain, and that goes right through the supply chain, from the people who supply to Edwards and who we supply to do it sustainably with the environment in mind is that you could invest in big factories all the way down the supply chain and you could deliver quicker, but we have to keep it environmentally green. And I think that's why, coming back to the activities action net zero, it allows us to shine a light, or as we jokingly say, a renewable light, on the activities that also happen in the delivery to our environmental solutions, from the solar panels to our wind turbines to our EV chargers to all that sort of thing. I think we see more and more as we have these discussions and open up, there's still that three things that come round is us, the consumer, the organisation like Edwards, or the manufacturing companies or the industrial companies, or even TLT, we were talking about the legal side of it, and the national politic or the politics in general all need to come together to do this. If I was to ask you to look 5 years out, what would success look for Action Net Zero?
For us at the moment would be to be able to have shown that the input that we have had across the Southwest in being able to address one of the biggest challenges that we see at the moment, which is the Southwest's renewable energy usage, is much lower than it should be. So it's currently sort of 11% renewable energy usage in the Southwest. So that's just under 90% of energy is fossil fuel consumed, which is not a good statistic, bearing in mind if we look from a UK perspective, we know the national grid, and it changes daily, obviously weekly, but in places we have an overall over 50% renewable energy generation. So where we need to get from the Southwest perspective, and any region, of course, as you well know, is that the renewable energy usage is much, much higher than that. Yep. And the reason for that is organisations like yourselves and also cities have committed to targets which show that renewable energy is going to be way higher than that. So what we need to be able to do is work together. So what does success look like for us? Actually, in 5 years' time is to look back and say, we were able to accelerate the transition to buying and use of renewable energies across the Southwest by doing ABC.
Our audience listening in today, what are the kind of key takeaways they should take from our discussion today?
For anybody, whether that's from an individual perspective or indeed with a work kind of hat on, our takeaways would be to think about everything that you do with sustainability in the background. And that's just because I think when you open your mind to thinking about the impacts from a natural world perspective, it does make you change some of your decisions. So, if you've got 2 cars, do you really need 2 cars? Could you go down to 1 car? If you are working from home a couple of days a week and you're commuting there for only 3, could you pop on a bus perhaps for one of them? Or could you get on an electric bike? Or could you get on a train? And if you start thinking slightly differently about how you go about your daily lives, I think that ultimately will drive that 50% reduction. So that's the first thing, think differently. Second thing I think would be about use your voice. So one of the most complex areas of sustainability is people knowing the right information. There's a lot of myths out there that needs to be broken down. So on a community level, for us, it's back to those powerful conversations that you can have in the pub, or
we like the
bingo,
pub.
or
We go
the
to the pub
supermarket, or wherever. In the back garden, is actually if you share that information, then we start to collectively break down the myths. And then if we can break the myths down, then I think that will enable a lot more people to accelerate or to transition quickly. So I think that second point is really important. Share, use your voice, and if you have a complaint, or again, go and complain to your MP. There's really great ways of being able to change things. So I think that would probably be my second takeaway.
Okay, so think different and share. Sounds good to me. I think from my point of view, and I think as Edwards organisation, we're really proud to be on this journey with Action Net Zero, and it's great to be partnering up with such the activities that are really looking to change the way of the lives of people, and particularly at the moment in the southwest of England. Pam, thanks for coming along today. It's been really great and a great insight into what we could do to as individuals, as organisations, and hopefully our politicians to change the way we do things now for things for the better. Thanks.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me. And also just the support that Edwards give in terms of our current campaign. As you know, we have the Renewable Energy 2022 campaign that will be going live soon. And that's all about supporting people to think differently about how they buy and use energy. So yes, excited to be able to work with you on that.
I like that last one. Think different. That sounds like a unique campaign we could run, no? Thanks,
yes,
Pam.
it's about taking control, isn't it? There we go. There's an insight.
Thanks, Pam.
Thank you.